What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are going to be talking about how California is the future. We are sitting down with Pete Leyden. What's up?
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on to the show.
Totally.
Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
You came into my world like about last year or so. I figured out about you through your daughter. We were at a little lunch, and then your daughter was like, my dad hosted Vivian Ming at his event series, and I was like, what? And then that's how I realized that our networks are interestingly connected. I need to start coming to your events, and I love your event series, always about the future, always with really epic people solving some of humanity's most pressing issues. I love it so much. So that's, okay, so Reinvent. 6 years now. With Reinvent.
My company,
So Reinvent does a bunch of different things as a media company, but one of them is these What's Now San Francisco and What's Now New York events. So tell us a bit about the inspiration. You were also at Wired before that and all this other stuff. So unpack some of, I guess, the history leading up to Reinvent and now what you're up to with Reinvent. Okay,
cool. Well, so I came to California over 20 years ago, early 90s, to work at Wired magazine. And Wired, the reason I came to Wired was it was talking about the revolution, the digital revolution. It was the first mainstream publication kind of explaining what the hell is going on with the computers and interconnected computers, the internet. And so I was there in the early days, the original crew, one of the early guys, not a founder, but in the kind of early days of that. And kind of became smitten by the place, by the people, by the kind of network of crazy, innovative folks that Wired was certainly in the middle of. And it's just been my life now for the last over 20 years here. And one of the things about Wired was really about the future. It didn't think of itself as a pure technology magazine. It thought of itself as, and still to this day thinks of itself as really talking about the future and talking about the future in all kinds of things. The future of science, the future of politics, culture, society, as well as it's driven by a core technology piece. And that's kind of also been animating my vision for the last 20 years. And so I've done a variety of things over those years, which if it's of interest, we could go over. But ultimately, the last 6 years, it's been my own company called Reinvent, which is a media company. It has some continuity with Wired. It also is a company that's really trying to connect up what I would call the A-team of kind of top innovators, which is why we have some overlap here. And getting them to focus on kind of big challenges, complex problems, things that are not figured out yet. And what we do is when we bring them together in events, or we bring them together in roundtables, I bring them into kind of similar situations of deep dive interviews. It's all around that framework. And so we have built audiences and a community, and over time that has those kind of interests. And like I say, we share a lot of interest in that, and that's what Reinvent is. And so out of that, though, we have sub-projects. One of the big projects we have for the last 3 years has been What's Now San Francisco. And that's essentially a forum here in San Francisco. It's a kind of invite-only thing, but basically once you're in, and you get to bring in whoever you want to bring in. But we every month go to a different field in the Bay Area, the broader Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and take some really leading innovator in a space that can explain what's happening in that space, what's really interesting, what's going to impact everybody else, but also wrestles with what are they wrestling with now? What are the questions they're wrestling with? What are the challenges they're wrestling with? What's their latest thinking? And they test out new ideas. And in that forum, it's in front of this cross-disciplinary network of people that have come in from all these other fields, and you have a really rich conversation for about 90 minutes, live streamed, edited later, and put out into the world. Does that all make sense to you?
I love our overlap.
And
not just only wanting to bring together the A-team and also solve some of these really pressing challenges, but also to want to inspire other people to care about these major pressing issues. And I want to take us, because we'll get more into like the what's now cutting edge stuff, but that also really relates to your past because you have kind of been at the cutting edge for a long time. So in this conversation, we'll definitely be talking about how California is the future, and it has been for a long time.
Yep.
Ever since the formation of the internet and the formation of kind of the Silicon Valley area, it's really exploded, and you gravitate towards this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, California, I mean, it depends how big a lens you want on this, but California has often been a trendsetter. It's always cut the new cultural trends, the new social trends, the new technologies. It's had but also new political trends and stuff. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. I would say, in general, the California, literally since the gold rush times, has attracted an eclectic mix of innovators, entrepreneurs, and kind of just out-of-the-box thinkers from all over the world. Yep. And it just consistently does that. And over time, you just create this kind of crazy mix of folks that has essentially built, weirdly to say, traditions of innovation, but it just has just so consistently cut new ground going forward in all these different fields. That after a while, it's something you got to really start thinking about. And I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, and thinking about how do you start to apply what happens here, how does it affect the rest of the country, in America's case, or the world
too. Yeah.
And this, if you kind of mention this kind of frame, my frame, which I've been exploring the last year, has been getting into explaining why does that happen, how does it happen, and by using a prism on looking at California today, how does that explain where the country is going to go in the next 15 years, or the world in the next 15 years? And there's a bunch of ways to talk about that if you want to go into that. But yeah, we're in a special place right here, and I'm very bullish on that. Sometimes people get put off by that sometimes.
I'm bullish on it.
But but I think if you're really smart right now, you got to tune into what's really happening here, because it's not just setting trends. In some respects, I think of it, and again, a bigger conversation is, we're building the next systems of the 21st century, and those systems are so different from the 21st century that we're building the systems of the 21st century, and they're so different from the 20th century that you could almost think of it as building a new, almost civilization that will have really long implications. And I think the more we think about that consciously and are aware of the profundity of changes that we're in the middle of, and the kind of long tail of what we do here, how it can impact the coming decades, I think it makes you think differently about what we do every day here.
Yes. And you also take this multidisciplinary approach to your lens that you see this with. And I think that's a very crucial pillar in the way that you are seeing this and also communicating it to other people. So maybe speak on the multidisciplinary approach to understanding exponential technology and understanding its impact across all of the different industries that it's currently hitting. I mean, this valley has had Google and Facebook and Apple just explode throughout it, and then we have NASA Ames, and we have Singularity University, and we have all this venture money that is funding all of these. Stanford and Berkeley are right here, and they're two of the most prominent university systems. So I mean, this is a huge hub for innovating, and especially for exponentials across these different industries. You've seen those as the lens, and you see them going to not only parts of the US, but parts of the world. And there are parts of the world that are also influencing Silicon Valley. Sure. There are Shenzhen's definitely a major hardware capital of the world. There's also lots of cultural trends that are started in Europe and other places. So, but yeah, go ahead and unpack more about
Well, let's go back to your first point, which is, to my mind, and this is nothing. Other people think this too, but really, innovation comes from essentially the cross-connecting between fields. I mean, if someone's stuck in one field, you get a lot of smart people in one particular field, and they go deep, and they're experts, and they know their little space. And there is some incremental innovation that happens in that case, but most innovation happens from when you kind of mash up different fields, or you really cross-connect different fields. And I'm not alone in thinking that. A lot of folks think that, but I think we don't really think, we don't think deeply enough about what's going on there. And what's happening is essentially innovation is when you got one kind of crew that's thinking one way and one crew thinking another thing. There's enough overlap and enough kind of cross connects that when you make those things happen, boom, you push it out another way that neither the fields alone was doing, but that there's a third thing going on. And so where you got to look for innovation is in these kind of mashup hubs of mashing up. And the Bay Area and California is, in America in a way, compared to other countries in the world, really excels at this. So if you take the whole world, like Japan, for example, there's innovative things happening, but it's very incremental innovation because it's, homogenous society of Japanese, very little immigration, very little cross-connect across cultures. They're smart folks and they know what they're doing and but they're not breakthrough innovations. They're not kind of opening up whole new fields. China, to that extent, is very homogenous in terms of, there's a lot of different variations within the Chinese people, but there's not super cross-connects across all races and cultures. And America has just specialized in that for the last 250 years. It's been an immigrant nation. It's bringing people from all over. It has very open policies of bringing people in, and there's very acceptance of kind of the cauldron of melting pot, all that traditions that we think about. That makes for an innovative culture in general. But then when you take this tilt to the country of people kind of migrating west, go west, young man, and all the different things of the open prairie and the frontier, and then the gold rush. And everybody keeps, so there's been this in the Hollywood. There's this whole pull. Now it's everyone coming to Silicon Valley. There's been this draw, even within a very innovative country that's mashing up all kinds of ideas. It then tilts even more people into these kind of California, and then in California it's really two hubs: LA, which is polyglot of cultures and languages and everything. But Silicon Valley and the Bay Area is even, I would say, one more notch above LA right now in terms of a magnet. It's bringing tons of young people all over the planet, people who really are ambitious, are entrepreneurial, are innovative, want a little piece of the action. So it's this crazy magnet that's happening here. And when you put all that together and kind of stir and just let it happen, and shit happens, and that's what's kind of been happening here. The whole West Coast, there's a kind of a tilt to because Seattle's happening a lot. You talk about biotech, San Diego. There's a whole media in LA. There's a whole phalanx of things happening on the coast. But if you really want to go to ground zero, if you really want to be at the epicenter of really what's roughing out the next systems of the 21st century, this new civilization, this next thing, really, this is the place to watch. That doesn't mean innovation is happening other places. That doesn't mean people can do all kinds of cool stuff all over the place. But this is kind of the uber place to do it.
Two things. Okay, the first thing is that this sort of approach of seeing fields, and David Eagleman recently told me this as well. He had published 120 academic papers and like 6 people had read them. And then he started Neosensory, New Senses, for those that are deaf, that now they can hear through vibration. So they're giving them new senses, same thing with their chest as well, like a vest for vibration as well. We were featuring him on Friday at a live event, and he's like, now with this entrepreneurship, he's able to impact the 130 million deaf people.
Right.
And so that is, that's a huge, so there's a big difference between being in academia and tinkering as an absolute subject matter expert in that one narrow field, which we need. We need people to still do that. But then we need them to somehow enable somebody with fresh lens that also understands the fundamentals to come in from the maybe decentralization movement, or maybe the nanotechnology movement, or the biotech movement, or whatever. And that way, these, like you said, there's this massive breakthrough into this new child of the fields. And so I totally love that view and embody that view and love the multidisciplinary lens. And I think it gives one of the richest perspectives of understanding reality possible. And I think that's where you and I vibe a lot as people that love hosting smart people and talking.
Well, because there is a role of someone who can connect those things, or is smart enough to at least dip into these various fields and pull out enough of interest and help translate it. I think that's underappreciated a lot. The journalism world that I originally kind of grew up into in my early career, I was a journalist. There was a lot of that going on, where if you're a journalist, you tend to just move around and talk to people, and over time move to different beats in the old days. And move to different regions of the country, and it was kind of celebrated that you don't go deep into one thing necessarily, but you're kind of this honeybee going all over the place. Yeah. But of course, that whole media field got destroyed, and so, but there's still this need for this cross-pollination, this cross-fertilization, this kind of cross-connection.
Now more than ever.
Now more than ever in many respects. And so I do feel that there is a role there that you're starting to see in podcasts. You got a podcast like this, and a show like you're doing, but there's all kinds of them now starting to come together, and the lens is not, I'm the, anthropology thing or blog, although there's that kind of world too, but there's a lot more sense that the world is complex, the world is really something that we got to kind of worry about, the cross connects and the explaining. Totally, there's a bunch of ways to talk about that, but it's the place to be right now, is between fields and cross-connecting fields rather than just be immersed in one field or another.
Yeah, and then I'm going to get to that second one that I want to get to, but as you slowly amass this multidisciplinary understanding of the world and these connections in these different fields, it becomes easier for you to link up people. You're not here to do everything. You're actually more so here to help other people find each other then, so that you can then be part of building different futures by just linking people together and having them go and birth these children of ideas into the world. So there's that side of things, which I'm so happy that we relate on, and as a major pillar of this California being the future. There's so many buckets to go and flowers to pollinate and get pollen from and spread around. And Amazon and Microsoft are up in Seattle. Those are two major companies as well. That's another hub. Like you were saying, LA, Hollywood, and entertainment industry, a lot of the YouTube sensations going on there. And then the San Diego biotech, machine learning culture as well. Okay, so this being said, you hit this point. I want to make sure we address it. We still give love to Chicago, New York, London, all these other places around the world as well. You made it clear that diversity of thought and like culture, these melting pots, is a huge like pillar of creativity and innovation. And I was trying to, when we hosted Jordan Peterson in our live event in February, I was really trying to point him in the direction that it is actually, worth it to, if people have maybe the same sort of credentials or intelligences, let's say, but one of them is from this, maybe you already have a bunch of people that are from Berkeley or from Stanford that are working at your company. It might be more beneficial to the bottom line, to the ideas of the company, to everything that's going on, for you to fly in the person from somewhere in Africa or South America or Southeast Asia or wherever they're located on the planet, because they have a different lens with which they see the world. And that means they have different maybe philosophies, different ethics, moralities, these different principles that actually add so much value to the idea and the innovation and the culture of the company. Now, are there like studies? Can we identify, maybe pinpoint some of these?
In terms of the diversity leading to more innovation?
Yeah.
Well, off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to just rattle them off the top of my head, but I would say that's totally the case. I would say the beauty of being in the Bay Area right now is, instead of having to go out into the heartland or go down to Argentina or something to find those people, is like they're coming here. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I'm located here, and have been for 20-some years, is just it's kind of self-selecting. Now, you could say it's self-selecting for innovative kind of personalities, entrepreneurial kind of characters, risk takers from these different places. But that being the case, they're still bringing the Argentinian perspective, the Brazilian perspective, the kind of Minneapolis perspective, the kind of there is this migration in, and I'm just always struck. I've been here, like I say, for 20-some years. I used to run Wired. I was the managing editor of Wired, and so I did a lot of hiring, and I've had a bunch of my own startups, this latest one for 6 years. So I've done a ton of hiring over my time, and I'm always struck when I put out a job thing, if it's an open kind of job, just the crazy backgrounds of people from all over the world, different languages, cultures, countries, continents, who think nothing of walking in and wanting to do a job. So it's not, and I'm finding That's particularly true in the last 10 years here, 15 years with the millennial generation. It's kind of age, now it's getting to be about 38 to 21 kind of period. That generation is just coming from all over the place. I mean, honestly, if I were a young person in that category, right, 38 is not young in that way, but for my generation, if anyone in that kind of cohort, if you had to look around the planet right now, do you want to be in London? Do you want to be in Hong Kong? Do you want to? Now, you could make a case maybe for certain places to get ahead of the curve in China, but I would say if there's one place you'd want to be, you'd come here. And so that, in fact, has been the calculus of many people.
Yes.
So it's like shooting fish in a barrel when you basically, have an event or invite people or go to a place and kind of interview people. You're just getting that diversity of opinion, which is why it just kind of feeds on itself.
Pete, are you a globalist or a nationalist?
I am totally a globalist. And I'm really bummed out about the kind of background, what's happening in the backdrop of this country, which kind of does bring up this California future thing a little bit, which is my bigger friend. Should I go there a minute? Because about the politics of that, or what do you want?
Let's go there.
Because there's a globalist perspective here in the Bay Area, and I would say in California in general, that is being championed. You couldn't see a better. There's places like New York and others that have a globalist perspective, but California is hyper-globalist, not even a smidgen nationalist, in my opinion. There's kind of remnants of Trump kind of people in the, middle of the country or middle of the state or something, but in general, hyper-globalist for good reason, They've experienced the diversity of globalism. They're tied in industries that are all over the place. They're in, media. Hollywood's all over the world. The technology's all over the world. They're getting along fine with all these polyglot cultures and languages and everything coming up from all over the world. LA has really superseded New York as the kind of Ellis Island of the world, of the country now. I mean, so we've now, whites are a minority in this state. Everything's fine. It hasn't gone to hell. I mean, we're living the future. It's kind of, we are essentially where America is heading over the next several decades. We're doing fine. We're loving it. We're seeing the benefits of that, the innovation coming off that. And I think what Trump and kind of a lot of this backlash to globalism is essentially a crew that's fearful of that kind of future, hasn't really been exposed to that kind of diversity. And so they're freaking out and trying to do everything they can to slow down that kind of move towards that, I would say, inexorable move, maybe not inevitable, but an inexorable move towards a more globalized, interconnected world.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, that's great.
So we talk about this quite a bit on the show, and this is going to be an interesting way to tie things in. So the innovation that's also occurring in China is occurring without a polyglot of cultures. Mm-hmm. So we don't have this massive mixing pot of people from South America and Europe and US and so et cetera. Mm-hmm. It seems to not be so mixing
What's with
pot.
the face when you say that about the, what's with the face?
There wasn't any intention for a face.
Yeah, I
there.
know.
No intention for a face.
Because you're a nationalist.
No, I am not a nationalist. Stop it. Stop with the labels in general. Like, let people be individuals. Like,
so go ahead, finish. Sorry.
Stop with the labels in general.
Go ahead, finish.
Just public service announcement. Enough with the labels. Let people be individuals. Okay, back to the show. All right. So now this idea that, okay, in the U.S. we have mixing pot. We have lots of innovation that's happening in at least, like we were talking about, in the Bay Area and whatnot, and then China's had a significant amount of innovation without a mixing pot, which has also been interesting to analyze. And I guess, first of all, what's your take on that?
Well, I don't know. One of my pieces of my background is I was a foreign correspondent for a while. Before I got into the technology world, I was a foreign correspondent in Asia. I spent. I
didn't know about this part of your background.
I was based out there for several years. In fact, I was in China way back in the Tiananmen Square era. In fact, a month after Tiananmen Square, I wasn't in Beijing for that, but I was in Tibet actually under martial law. In fact, I went in through Hong Kong. I spent a lot of time in Chengdu, and ultimately got into Tibet under martial law. I spent time in a Chinese jail. There's a bunch of, because there's a huge crackdown on all kinds of folks.
We can't just let you get away with that.
But I'm saying, so I know a little something about
story
tell
time.
your
China.
Story
China.
time. Chinese jail.
Okay.
Story time.
Well, that's a little bit. Let me finish this point. We can get to that. So I've kind of spent some time out there. I spent a lot of time in Japan. I was actually based in South Korea, actually, in that period, late 80s, early 90s. And so this isn't just talking out of my hat a little bit. I would say that Asian innovation, and including Chinese innovation, is not the same as what we see here in kind of California era, kind of California or American, broadly speaking, innovation.
Teach us about the difference, yeah.
Well, I would say, and it has to do a little bit with that lack of diversity. They're extremely good at incremental innovation. They're really good at focusing resources, whether it was the Japanese economy and the government in the 80s and 90s, or whether the South Korean trying to like pump up new industries or get behind Hyundai Motors or Samsung to kind of grow them into the global companies they were. They're really good at amassing collective resources through government and kind of focus. They're really good at kind of iterating and making better and better and better in that space. But they're not really good at opening up whole new industries, trying completely new fields, like breakthrough kind of new. They weren't coming up with the next Facebook or Twitter and stuff. They kind of do tend to this day kind of follow on patterns that have been kind of broken through often in America.
And that's the whole intellectual property.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. Also, a lot of the best innovators that are really breaking the best ground in China are coming out of the United States, kind of schooling and stuff. That's not. It's not to say over time they might not.
Lots of the top sell Nature science papers are being written in China, though, which is very interesting.
True, but again, it's not the stuff that's going to kind of take the world by storm. It's not going to open up a completely new field. It's really useful when you want to put a lot of energy, let's say, investments in solar cells and refining that process to get that to the point where it would really break through. But did they come up with the original idea of a solar cell, or did they really? They haven't really done that kind of thing yet. Now they could be getting there, and they're getting to be a sophisticated economy, and they have their own kind of internal resources. I would argue, though, that two things: they don't have the diversity of coming together, and people are not going to streaming over to China the way they're coming to Stanford and Berkeley, that kind of thing. And also, I do believe in open media press and open society that you can kind of freely think and talk the way you want. I really do believe over time that does kind of constrain the level of innovation you can do. Now, you can debate that, and other people might say differently, but I do think there's some limits on how fundamental the reinvention is going to come out of China. I think, again, my company called Reinvent, I think if you're going to really look for the real breakthroughs on how to really reinvent or reorganize the systems going forward, it's not going to be a Chinese version. It's going to be, I would say, a Californian version.
Yes, and so prior to getting to the California future and the Trump conversation that we were going into, let's go to the Chinese jail story.
Okay, well, it kind of shows you a little bit about China. So I was a Westerner. I was working for Newsweek at the time. I was based in South Korea. And when Tiananmen Square happened, and for people who don't know the basics there, it was young people in China coming together in Beijing to demand certain openness of new thinking and speaking and ideas and democracy. And the government just came in and absolutely, with tanks and everything else, and just mowed it down and stifled it. And
what year?
This is 1989.
89.
And it was a horrific crackdown, and a lot of the Western media that was already in China watched it, and people at that time were really caught up in it. And a lot of the country then was locked into martial law, and so I was the younger kind of.
Explain martial law.
Martial law means essentially the government suspends what rights you did have. And again, in China was limited at that time compared to what the rights we have here. And literally there's military folks on many kind of street corners. And And they have an extraordinary ability to kind of crack down on people gathering or anything that's suspicious or anything that would disturb the peace, because they're worried about this Tiananmen Square getting into other parts of the country, to other cities.
As in your United States law, privilege or was then voided.
Yeah, well, for the Chinese, martial law for the Chinese, but as a foreigner and as a visitor, it was also limiting what I could do. And so...
Martial law tries to give you rights in other countries?
No. The martial law that the Chinese were imposing was essentially saying, for example, putting curfews. You couldn't be out on the streets after a certain amount of time.
So it was martial law by China on the Chinese
people, yes. And I was essentially outside the country when Tiananmen Square happened, but I was a journalist. So I came in as under the cover of being a teacher, a young traveler, rather than a journalist, because it's the only way I could have gone in. They were not going to let any journalist in. Yeah. I actually came in with my girlfriend at the time, who's later now my wife, but we came into the country, but I was there to try to pick up what was going on in the rest of the country, and so I was kind of going the route of inner China, not because Newsweek and other places had Beijing and other places covered in Hong Kong.
You were in Chengdu then.
I was in Chengdu, I got there, and then I basically eventually got into Tibet, which was really isolated. Yeah. And a big crackdown up there, and I was able to, when I was there, as supposedly a teacher, just traveler, with my Chinese handlers, they wouldn't let me go anywhere without a translator who's really keeping an eye on me. Yeah. That I happened to be in an environment that I saw outside the palace of Dalai Lama, honestly. It was a crowd of Tibetans who were coming together, which was making the Chinese nervous. And in the middle of this group of, probably 500 Tibetans, a small group of Buddhist nuns started doing some chants to actually condemn the Chinese for what they were doing. Wow. And I was able to kind of, in the chaos that was started to happen, and then the police started to go in there to try to break this up, and I was able to get away from my handler, jumped a fence, went there, in the chaos, got some shots of it, and they saw me take the photos, but in the chaos, I was able to get my film canister. This is pre-digital with the film canister. Get it out, get it to my girlfriend, who crotched it, literally.
Oh my God!
In the confusion, no one could see her do that, and I put a different canister in, and with the confusion. And so when they inevitably came to get me, because they saw me doing...
And because you hopped the fence.
Because I hopped the fence and the whole thing, and they saw that, oh my God, I had a camera. They arrested me, and I was taken into the Chinese jail system. And but what I did, which was fun, it was kind of creepy. It was really under this palace of the Dalai Lama that had been built centuries before, and you're kind of in the basements.
You got lucky. There. You went to like the more okay jail.
No, it actually was. It was still bad jail. But there was a guy interrogating me to kind of figure out what's going on. But what I did to kind of confuse the whole thing was, as soon as they brought me in the confusion of kind of getting me going, I said, "Look, I know you want this film, and so I'm going to give you the film." And I opened the canister and I pulled the film out and exposed it, so no one would ever know it was on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though I knew it was a fake one.
Oh, it's so brilliant.
They didn't know it was actually not that, but they were mad because they couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
So they were furious at me, and so they put me. I did have to spend some time there, and but ultimately I got out. I mean,
how long did you spend there? Do you know?
It was a good day and a couple days. But meanwhile, my girlfriend, by the way, when they took me in, she went to the hotel room.
Developed.
And no, it didn't develop it, but actually it had a false kind of ceiling. You know how those kind of things happen? Sometimes you can lift the ceiling up, and she hit it up in there, and because they did,
in case.
Smart. They did go to the room to see whether something had happened, and
now I see why you guys have been together for so long.
Well, they watch the show, so we got to be careful.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That is true. Well, I was worried. Actually, I was worried about things about. This was a long time ago. But anyhow, the point is that's a side story. But it was
a great side story.
It was a good side story.
Yeah. But stories like this that also need to be highlighted in the world. They're so fascinating.
Well, China's come a long way from that time for sure. But it's still, the Communist Party is in charge, and they jail people all the time, and they shut people up all the time, and they won't let foreigners do what I mean, we forget about that piece of China.
Yeah.
It's not gone.
Yeah.
It's not like,
Yeah.
I mean, we're bad enough here with, in my opinion, Trump and the crew that's coming into power here, but nothing like the Chinese, and we forget about that. So when you think about innovation, think about trying to innovate in an environment like that where the police can grab you and pull you in and you can't take a picture of a thing that's obviously happening in front of you. That's a different world of innovation than all the crazy shit you can do here without having to worry about spending time in a jail for capturing the truth. Although, who knows, in some Trumpian future, we might actually get there. So
some Trumpian future. No!
So, okay, I would love to learn more about that story and everything. That's so interesting. Hopefully on another time that when we get the chance to sit down there. There's still so much more to unpack. So, okay, so you started unpacking this sort of, in the United States, we do have like a private prison system, and it's kind of gross, and it's causing recidivism, and it doesn't actually rehabilitate people. There's all this stuff.
Of course not.
And yeah, I know.
That's the purpose of a private prison system, to rehabilitate people. They want to send people out and commit more crime and send them back in. It's a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yes. And we got a long way to go to be able to actually work on molding people's minds to be less criminal and work on that, and also not criminalize things like marijuana, which is such a large percentage of incarceration, over half last time I checked. Okay, so then, but in China we have this crazy there's actually some authoritarian top-down regime which will literally police state you into jail for being against it. So that's also not okay. There's other places on the planet that will actually just murder you for thinking differently than them. So we are very grateful in the United States to have what we have, even though the person that's in charge right now as the president, you disagree with in many ways. So, okay, let's unpack the disagreement. So over the last, you wrote about this in the California is the Future Medium series, which we've linked in the bio. Go check it out, link in the bio. Okay, so you wrote about this at the beginning of 2017, and then several times since then, you've been writing about this, that this is kind of the last, it's an economic transition that's happening. It's an ideological transition, and with that comes this sort of last breath of, so unpack.
Yeah, I'd frame it this way: is like, if you really step back on what's going on in our era here, we're watching a fundamental transition between two historical eras. There was essentially in the Enlightenment world that started back, in the Founding Fathers' days here, but the days in Europe when Europe was kind of dominant. We're talking the 16th century, 17th century, 15. I would say maybe the 18th century. So 1700s, late 1600s and 1700s, there was essentially this explosion of new knowledge around the Enlightenment, the birth of kind of representative democracy, the early Industrial Revolution, discovery of carbon energy, all the things that essentially have created the financial capitalism, the flow of money. I mean, we literally created this civilization, a Western civilization that kind of came to birth in that period, which came to the United States, and the Founding Fathers, part of that Enlightenment thing, created from whole cloth the way we organize our government, bicameral House of Representatives, all that stuff. That system has been chugging along and building. The Industrial Revolution keeps building. The carbon energy kept building. We kept electing people. And we've had this crazy, cresting in the 20th century there. But that system, I would argue, is starting to really come to an end. And that there's a 21st century system that'll go for centuries further, I would say. What's that? That is a digital civilization, totally different foundation. Mm-hmm. That's a global civilization. That's got to be a globally interconnected planet thing, not these little nation states that we organized, 250, 300 years ago. But now we got a globally integrated planetary systems. We got a climate change crisis. It has to be a sustainable system. We got to get off, fossil fuels. Also, there's a fundamentally different systems that have to be created here. And so what we're living through, and my life has kind of been watching the tail end of that old thing coming down and get worse and worse and more and more difficult, and the new thing get birthed, from Wired magazine days and others, watching this new thing start taking off. We're in the middle of this transition. And what Trump and the kind of, I would say, conservative Republican backlash in the United States, but also it's being seen in Brexit, the European backlash, the right wing in Europe is doing a similar thing, is they're horrified by this and scared to death about this next thing, which is global and diverse and all this stuff we know. And many of them also are rooted in these old industries of I'm working in the oil field, I'm from Texas kind of guy. And they're doing everything they can to slow down that next thing and to stop this kind of old thing from kind of falling to pieces. And it's in that way and Trump is just the extreme last gasp of that thing. And we're watching that. So it's not like Trump is leading us to a new thing and it's going to be the next thing for the whole rest of the century and he's got a bunch of new ideas of how to go forward. He's a mess. He's just this kind of spasm of ideas reacting against this next system. Now, unfortunately, the next system isn't fully developed to the point where oh, awesome, that's what we want to do. And it's so much better than this old thing. But so that's where you get into this California of the future thing, is if you had to go to one place on the planet right now where that is the most developed system, where you really want to see where are these technologies more fully adapted, where is that globally connected, diverse crew working together in ways, where is the most sustainable thing with the most ambitious agenda, how is this new life around biotech and genetic engineering and everything else getting worked out, where do autonomous vehicles work, and how does AI work with humans, and who augments what, and that thing is happening here more than any other place in the world, and that the politics around that have been adjusting for the last 15 years or so to kind of accommodate that new way of doing things. And if you want to look at where the country's going and where the world could soon go, it's happening in California. That's what the California's Future series is in Medium. Long, in-depth articles that lay this all out, give all the data, give all the kind of things. Now, one short version to explain that is California is a totally blue state now, super blue. There isn't a Republican, let alone a conservative left standing. There's all statewide offices are held by Democrats.
Yeah,
both super majorities, all this kind of stuff is
a monoculture recently.
You could call it that, but what I'm saying is the reason that's happened is the craziness of that Republican right-wing conservative thing, which was denying the future, was denying climate change, was all these crazy ideas that are just so ridiculous.
But isn't it interesting though how Thiel backed Trump, but he's also libertarian and futuristic, right?
Let's not go into him. I think he's an oddball guy in that.
Aren't there a couple people that sort of believe in that, like in that ballpark of libertarian values? They support Trump, but they're also very futuristic. It's kind of interesting also.
True, but the vast majority of the Bay Area and California in general, and the tech leaders and all these guys, they're basically much more, I would say, progressive Democrats. Now, the progressive Democrats in the old school, they're not that old school thing. There's a new thing going here that the closest thing is a kind of progressive Democrat, which is why the state is up and down. It's a crazy progressive space, legalizing marijuana, doing all the stuff we know. Gavin Newsom is a total tech nerd dude, is going to be the governor. That thing is much closer to where the country and the world needs to go than the Trump kind of thing that's going on in Washington right now. And so, and I would even go down so far as to say you can literally calibrate it to a 15-year time delay, that when Reagan became governor of California to start the conservative thing, 15 years later, he was the president of the United States. And so, people say, oh, California's always a kind of goofy blue thing. No, but it used to be totally red. It was the birth of the conservative movement. It used to be, all this stuff. California is the future of whatever that next thing is. It was the future of conservatism for a while, and then the country went conservative. Now it's the future of, I would say, blue state progressivism, and I think it's going to come, and it is coming faster than people think. It's going to come to the country. So anyhow, that's the kind of theory there, and if you want, there's ways to read that and you can see it. There's a lot of data on this. There's all the demographic changes we've been experiencing here for the last 20 years is happening on time delay in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. You can just go through the whole thing. And so that is kind of the premise here. But it's an inspiring and I think hopeful scenario, which is it's not like there's no solutions. It's not like the politics is hopeless. It's not like we don't have any idea where to go. But I think the beginnings of that space are already alive and well here, and they're actually growing. Now, have we solved homelessness? No. Have we, there's a lot of stuff that's challenges.
Totally.
But that doesn't mean, where are you gonna look to solve that? I would say I'd rather be looking here than looking at Texas or, Indiana or, for that, other places in the world. I just think there's a lot of, this is where we're roughing out that next system, and you should pay attention.
Ironing out the kinks of civilization and building the future.
Well,
quick thought about what you just said.
Yeah, go ahead.
You seem to have all of the marbles pushed in the direction of California being the future, and I tend to agree with you about California being the future in many ways. One part of the marbles that I thought was interesting. A lot of my last couple years has been not only in science communication but also in free thinking, that I listen to a lot of people's perspectives across all different types of political thought. And there has been a sort of growing ideology about how it's potentially true that the United States has, especially areas like California, have made a very strong push in the direction of doing things like using psychedelics and understanding the whole we are one mentality, and that they want to push towards globalism really quickly. And then there's potentially other places in the world that lag behind a little bit in that sense, that haven't used as many psychedelics, that aren't as understanding of the we are one mentality, that are still waiting for the United States to potentially drop its walls down a little bit just so that other people can take advantage of the United States. And that's where this whole idea of this kind of short-term nationalistic principle comes into play on their argument in favor of the long-term globalism. What do you think about that?
Wait, what is it, meaning the short-term our short-term nationalism with the Trump thing, you mean? Putting the walls up?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's a disaster.
Well, no. So it's not about short-term nationalism putting the walls up like the actual wall of Mexico and stuff like that. It's more about that the United States staying in control as a geopolitical leader,
I see.
And saying things like the United States is going to stand firm on some of its nationalistic principles regarding trade and just geoeconomics in general, and then this short-term nationalism will then enable the United States to stay more as a global leader, because other places in the world might not be so inclined towards the we are one mentality quite yet, and the globalism mentality quite yet. Who knows, maybe they are even more so ready than the United States is. Maybe this is completely a wash, but it's just taking in this perspective and this ideology as one that is a potential is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because it could be that black sheep in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is in fact a monoculture. The Bay Area is in fact completely infiltrated with identity politics, and it's just the total truth of the matter is that when you look at things from a more of a multidisciplinary geoeconomic perspective, the United States staying at the frontier as a geopolitical leader at the most crucial time that there ever has been to be a geopolitical leader, because of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, neurotechnology, cryptocurrency, and blockchain technology. All these things are proliferating space technology across the earth, and if the United States loses its geopolitical leadership by going we're good, we're all psychedelic out, it's chill, let's all work together as a planet, then all of a sudden that's the perfect time for all the exponential technologies and nations to come into the US and to be thank you for putting everything to the side and letting us do that. So I'm not saying, I'm not fearing people, I'm just saying that it's tough to be a black sheep in this sense.
That's interesting. Because I'll kind of one up you on that a little bit in terms of my own thinking around this is,
yes.
And this could be taken the wrong way, so I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but there's a side of me that's thinking, if you really take the big picture, maybe Trump is a good thing at some level from a global long-term perspective, in that there was a American hegemony thing after the Cold War ended, that without Russia and all this stuff, the American kind of, in the 90s, actually when Wired was kind of going crazy and the economy was booming and, things were happening into the early part of the century here, there was a vision of the world as kind of with this one superpower, United States kind of driving things. And I would say Obama's vision was kind of building on that. It was a more benign idea. It wasn't going to abuse that hegemony, but it was trying to think, hey, America needs to lead the world into the sustainable global future. And actually, I was part of there's a whole other political thing I've done with Obama's campaign and that kind of stuff, but that's a different story. But I was essentially shared in generally that idea. But then the Trump backlash to that was like, at first I was horrified by it, but the more I've been thinking about it, it's like, well, maybe we needed an accelerated takedown of that old thing, whether it's the old thing of, the old, systems of healthcare and bureaucracy and old government things in this country, or whether it's globally a hegemonic United States military running everything and being the biggest 800-pound gorilla and everything. Maybe there is a way that we want to open more space up for other people. We want to open space up for more regions. We want to kind of lower the kind of influence of the United States in some ways around the world. But mostly clear by dismantling the old thing. Maybe we're clearing space for a new thing that post-Trump. Trump isn't going to lead the new thing. He doesn't have a creative bone in his body in terms of real envisioning the next systems. But frankly, weirdly, driving down some of these old systems into the ground, which is what he's kind of doing, maybe opens up space. Maybe we need a post-NATO thing. Maybe we need a kind of a different way of thinking of Social Security and Medicare, and maybe there is a kind of a 21st century versions of these things.
Definitely.
That he's not envisioning it in that kind of way, but he's kind of a vehicle to kind of help dismantle the old thing and accelerate its kind of transition to something new. And that kind of is an interesting way to think about it. And it's maybe close to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel it's kind of counterintuitive a little bit, and people freak out. So, for example, I'm now of the opinion that, if we would have had Hillary as a president, Hillary Clinton, it would have been more of the same. She didn't have the transformational side to her. She wasn't going to take us to the next level. Now, she wouldn't have done all the dumbass stuff that he's doing, but that's what I'm saying. But she wouldn't have gotten us to the next thing either. So the question is, if we're really thinking transformation, if you're really talking about fundamental reinvention, if you're really looking at a world post, into climate change, digital, global, sustainable, that has to happen, maybe we need to start to get more radical, and we need to really start swinging bigger, and maybe whatever comes after Trump is going to do that thing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you possess this open mind. It's difficult to be able to calculate all of the variables and all of the disciplines that are going into these nuanced thoughts, but just the fact that we are being so open-minded about the conversation is fantastic. Okay, couple quick thoughts. I really appreciate your vision for the globalism, just because whenever you see photos of Earth from Moon, or you see photos of Earth from the satellites that have went out super far away, and you just see the pale blue dot, you realize that everybody that's ever lived and died has lived and died right there on that little blue dot that has built this world that we have. And so the idea of we are one, we don't need to see an alien race before we realize that we are of the same tribe on Earth. So it might take a little while, and however we get there, I hope it doesn't have suffering and it doesn't have lots of violence along the way to get there. So let's get there together quick. Okay, last couple questions on the way out. Okay, what do you think about this? Do you think we're alone in these cosmos?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I think there's definitely other intelligences out there. I'm a total... I'm a big science fiction fan. I read a ton of science fiction. I watch a lot of science fiction. In fact, I'm really getting into The Expanse right now. I don't know if you know that whole series that I'm kind of getting into right now. Love reading a ton of science fiction. But in just generally my worldview, my way the cosmos works, the way biology will evolve from kind of life evolves in certain kind of just situations and all the Earth-like planets out there. I'm convinced that life is more common than we think, than a lot of people think, and that actually there's other intelligent life out there. Now, there is these kind of expanses. It's not clear to me that whatever intelligence we have or someone else has, we're going to be able to expand those distances in any kind of practical way. So it might not be that we'll ever interact with those folks, or if we do, it'll be some kind of just really distant communication thing. I don't think, wormholes and all these things, and we've kind of speculated on in science fiction. It doesn't necessarily think they're true. But I think just the odds of us being the only intelligent beings in the universe is kind of, it's crazy. It's so, the hubris of that and the kind of monomaniacal, kind of egotistical thought of that is just alone is just makes me think that's ridiculous. But also just my understanding of how science would work and evolution works thinks this is not going to happen. We're not alone.
So then the follow-up to that is, do you think we're in a simulation?
Oh, it's simulation? Is that the basis of that thing?
Yeah, simulation theory expands the mind to new areas of thinking. Not necessarily the point is to have a binary yes or no answer, but just to be able to have the conversation.
You mean that we're a simulation within some other universe or some other kind of situation? That's a bit of a stretch from my own day-to-day way of thinking. I mean, just because I'm an open-minded guy and I actually understand that, who knows, why would we at this era, this time of just 10,000 years of this species trying to think about the world, but by no means do we know everything about what's going on in the universe or what's going on even in this planet, or let alone what's going on in our bodies. There's tons of unanswered questions. In another 10,000 years, maybe we'll figure out most of it, or maybe it'll be 500 years. With the accelerated learning we have now, potentially, and maybe there's beings that are a million years old and they've nailed everything. But so I'm open to that we're in a simulation within some other kind of environment that we just can't perceive and can't break out of our simulation. Possible, infinitesimally possible. But the way I live my life is that there's one universe, we're a part of it, we are on a little corner of this galaxy, which is one galaxy of billions, and that there's other beings in other parts of the universe here in other galaxies that have just as meaningful, poignant, and kind of intense lives as we do, and that they're doing good and we're doing good, and we should all be totally feeling like awesome. There's room for everybody. So let's just have let it be.
Yeah. And then last question, Pete, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The most beautiful thing in the world? That's an interesting question.
You should pick it up for what's now SF in New York.
That's an interesting question. A lot of people would fall back on this, but to me, what's amazing is I have a family, and you met my daughter actually, so we can bring it back to the beginning of how you talked about this thing. Is like,
and Greg too, so nice.
And Greg, yeah, my daughter's boyfriend. The idea that two people who love each other coming together and having sex can actually start another life that becomes a totally different consciousness, that becomes this being that has 100 years of living, and that is running on with all these amazing things that how these bodies work, but it comes from just literally this moment of connection, is a pretty magical, amazing thing that even though we know a lot of the core science of why that happens, just this idea that happens is just mind-blowing. And to have watched that with my own daughter and to watch that thing kind of grow up around me, which is a common experience. It's nothing, every human being, you can be a peasant in the middle of Africa and you've had that exact same poignant experience as any sophisticated, super high-tech, rich, ultra-wealthy person has. Same human experience. That's a pretty amazing thing. And so that would be at least one of my candidates.
Yeah, that's a really good one. The complexity and all of the interesting variables around love and also procreation, molding another mind into the world. Yeah, and also the complications that do arise for somebody that is more wealthy with love versus one that is not. There's so many complications that come from that.
True enough.
Yeah, and mental health in general. It's so strange. Pete, Leyden, such a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it was great being here. It's good. It's good we've joined forces and can kind of talk.
Yeah.
Hope we do more of it.
Yeah, there's so much more. We are going to be solving some of humanity's most pressing challenges, bringing together these networks of people, California being the future, and also just build the future. Build the future. We talk about that all the time on the show. Rebirth the public intellectual, build the future. Let's do it together. If you guys had a good time, go and share this content with a couple people. Definitely build with this. Don't just consume, go create, go make blog posts, go make videos, go start companies, go and innovate, go do it, guys. Also, comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to start a community chat about things, get chatting about it, subscribe. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Join us on Patreon, help us scale the content, scale the impact to more people. Definitely join us there. We also accept cryptocurrency, links in the bio. Check out Pete's work, all links in the bio. Thanks Ron, our producer, director. Much love everyone. Peace.